Hey folks, DragonKeeper here. If you haven't checked out my personal website, BrittanyTaylorBarber.com yet, please do so. It contains links to where you could purchase my own original published fiction, plus links to my other socials, so give it a look if you're interested. And now, on to the review.
You've never faced anything like this. Let them come.
So, funny story, I actually saw this movie with my dad, and after the movie ended and the credits were rolling, we noticed Steven Spielberg's name in the credits. He's credited as executive producer in this movie, and I said, hey look, Spielberg worked on this, and my dad turned to me and said, that's why it was good. So, to be fair, I'm pretty sure Spielberg has produced at least a few of the previous films. I don't know how many, but I do have a vague memory of seeing his name also as executive producer credit on, like, the first film. And maybe the second one, too. So, like, Spielberg is not the reason that this film was good. This film was actually directed by, I think, Stephen Cable Jr. is his name. The guy who directed Creed 1 and 2. I looked up on TV Tropes, and he's, not TV Tropes, TF Wiki. And they say that at age 33, he's actually the youngest person to ever direct a Transformers movie. And how humiliating has it got to be for Michael Bay that this new upcoming film director with less experience than him has already made a way better Transformers movie than him. So based on those, even though like my dad's joke might not have been accurate, you could tell just by the joke what we thought of this movie. This movie is pretty decent. So the critical reaction to this film has been kind of negative. This film is sitting at a 52%, which is a certified rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. But what's funny is that the, like, critic quote at the top of the page summarizing critics' opinion actually sounds really positive if you read it out of context. Thanks to some genuine human drama between the set pieces and palpable affection for the title characters, Transformers Rise of the Beast is one of the franchise's more enjoyable outings. Said more enjoyable outing is currently sitting at a steady 52% Rotten Tomatoes. Wow. Critics do not expect a lot from these movies, are they? Like, this film is so much better than the other Michael Bay films. It's okay, I guess. That's what they think. What do I think? I actually enjoyed this movie quite a lot. I feel like a lot of what critics don't like about it are kind of elements that are kind of intrinsic to Transformers. This franchise is not really one that's going to be like a big critical darling just due to the nature of it. Critics don't like big CGI-ridden action scenes. They don't really like simplistic plots. They don't really like drama between like non-human characters. There are exceptions to that, but those are elements that it's kind of an uphill battle to get a critic to like a film. Or at least to get a critic, like, to give up their pride and say that they like a film. Not to say that film critics will always hate films that nerds like. Critics, for example, responded really positively to Across the Spider-Verse, as they should. But with Transformers, you know, it's whatever. So this movie is a sequel of sorts to the Bumblebee film that came out in 2018. But I say of sorts because this film seems pretty reluctant to actually be a sequel to that movie. Like I complained about in my reaction to the trailers, Charlie, the human from that film, does not appear. And the movie doesn't really focus on Bumblebee. Apparently, an early working title for the film was Bumblebee 2, and that was scrapped, and I can see why, because Bumblebee is not the main character at all. And other Autobots get more focus than him this time around, which is fine, especially since the human characters this time around are actually pretty good. You can kind of tell because that this was directed by the guy who directed Creed, because the humans live in New York City, and their lives have this kind of grittiness and like drama to it that feels very believable and likable. The two humans this time around are a guy named Noah. I think he's ex-army. I don't know if he's still enlisted, but they call him like a private in the army. He's clearly not working there now, though. He's just trying to make ends meet and like get a job so that he can pay for his little brother's hospital treatment. This seems like a plot device that's been in a lot of movies, like, I gotta pay for my sick kids. You know, it's actually kind of a cliche that was made fun of in Airplane, which came out in the 70s, the littlest cancer patient. So this could have easily been really manipulative, but it doesn't feel manipulative. It feels very real. The way the movie does it, this kind of drama with, I can't pay for my kids' medical bills, is actually like, it feels relatable and not manipulative. Sorry. Part of what makes this feel more natural is that the kid himself is not like, you know, the little pathetic, pale kid with the handkerchief wrapped around his head and like, you know, it only says like the sweetest, darlingest things. This kid actually is pretty tough and has some grit to him. There's a scene early on where you could see that he's hiding his symptoms from his brother probably because he knows that the family can't pay. The second main human in this movie is this woman named Elena, who works as an intern at a museum. And we see right away that Elena is brilliant. She really, really knows her history. And she's way smarter than her boss, but probably because she's new and probably because she's black, her boss tends to take credit for her expertise, and she also dismisses her opinion when she's onto something important. There's a definite racially charged element to the issues both of these characters face. A quick shot around Noah's room at the beginning of the movie shows that he's got the Puerto Rico flag hanging on his back wall. So even though he says that he was born and raised in New York, his family comes from a Puerto Rican background. And there is an implication that his race is contributing to what's making it so hard for him to get a job. And of course, Elena's, the way that her boss treats her is also very racially charged. What I like about this element is nobody outright tells them, I'm doing this because you're black. But the implication is still in your mind. You don't know that scene in the Emoji Movie, one of the many terrible moments in that scene where, Jailbreak gets onto Jean's case because...
women are always coming up with stuff that men are taking credit for.
And when she said it outright, all of us felt like a little dumber. This movie understands subtlety, which is weird for a Transformers film. And to be fair, it's not so subtle that you don't immediately know what they're onto. At least Elaine at no point in this film says, they always ignore me because I'm black. We can see that with our eyes. You don't need to spell it out for us. The human drama in this film is actually done so well that when the robots do show up, it almost feels like an interruption. I was genuinely invested in Noah's story because when his latest opportunity for a job interview falls through, he decides his only recourse left to get the treatment his brother needs to not die is crime. He's never stolen anything before, and he's sneaking into this place to steal a really fancy car, and the whole time he's doing it, I'm like, wow, man, I can't believe he has to turn to crime. I hope he can pay for his brother's treatment. Oh wait, this is a Transformers movie, isn't it? It almost feels like this could be a functional film without Transformers. Just follow Noah. With no robot. There's a timeline out there where this movie exists. But because this is a Transformers movie, of course the car he steals is an Autobot. Specifically the Autobot Mirage, who, I don't know if he appeared in the Michael Bay films, but there were so many damn characters in that movie, even if he did appear, it doesn't matter. Mirage is arguably, aside from Optimus, the Autobot that gets the most focus. His friendship with Noah is the one that's the most focused on. He gets the most dialogue. He gets the most scenes, and he is the literal vehicle, by which Noah is transported to the world of Transformers. Mirage in this movie, his personality is nothing like it was in G1, which I'm okay with. I feel like Transformers media for a long time is kind of too enslaved by G1 that they're not willing to do more variation and change things up. That said, the personality Mirage does have is not super interesting. He kind of reminds me of Sideswipe from Robots in Disguise. If you remember, I watched all of that show on my channel. Mirage is basically a more cheerful Sideswipe. He's that brash young guy. He basically comes across like an immature teenager at times. He makes corny remarks. Actually, now that I think about it, he's more similar to the animated incarnation of Bumblebee than Bumblebee is. I have seen some criticism that his friendship with Noah isn't quite there in terms of emotional connection. And while it isn't given as much focus as the relationship between Charlie and Bumblebee in the last film, plus it isn't done as artfully since Mirage can talk. In fact, he never shuts the fuck up. Their bond is kind of believable. I do like the scene where Noah first tries to steal Mirage, not knowing that he's a robot from outer space, because the way Mirage, messes with him while he's trying to do that, it gives you, a clear view into Mirage's personality, even though he doesn't say a word. It kind of reminds me a bit of the Robots in Disguise short, where that unfortunate carjacker keeps trying to steal cars, not knowing that all of them are Autobots. There's a sequence where, Noah is repeatedly trying to unlock the car so he can get in and hotwire it. Every time he unlocks it, it immediately locks again. And because we've seen the Autobot insignia on the hood, we know that this is an Autobot messing with him. And what follows is a pretty well done chase scene through New York as Mirage is trying to answer Optimus' summons while also dodging the human police. And we also see more implications of Mirage's personality with the way he drives around, and he can create holograms in this, and He creates holographic duplicates of himself to confuse the police, and all of the holograms have Noah included in them, and one of the holographic Noahs flips off the cops behind them. So, like, just that bit, with no dialogue, you get a picture of, like, who this Autobot is. He's a prankster. He's cheeky. He's kind of frustrating sometimes. When he talks, it's not as annoying as it has been. It's certainly not as annoying as those two Autobots from the second film. You know which two I mean. But there are times where his joking, like, wisecracking personality doesn't quite fit. He keeps up that same persona even in, like, serious moments in the film, and it's like, dude, read the room! Can you not? I also really enjoyed the villains in this film. The makers of this film seem to have learned what not to do from watching the Bay films, and a big problem with the Bay films, as I referenced it on many, there were so many Autobot and Decepticon characters that you couldn't keep track of them all. So when you see a battle scene, a bunch of robots fighting, it's like, I have no idea who these people are. Did we see them before? Maybe? I think it's all a blurry mess, I can't tell. While the villainous faction in this, the Terracons, do have, like, little minion-y spidery things that they can summon to provide, like, mass hordes of troops, there's really only 3 that you need to remember. There's Scourge, who's the leader, and, like, the most prominent face of the villains in this movie, even more than Unicron, because we only really see Unicron's eyes. He's big. The other is Nightbird, who I was pleased to see works really well as, like, a sapient villain and not just, like, a drone created by humans like she was in G1. I really, really enjoyed Nightbird's scene. She was really cool. I actually wasn't sure if Nightbird was male or female when she first spoke because her voice is so deep. But when I saw the twin katanas, I basically knew, like, oh, that's Nightbird, isn't it? The third one, Battletrap, really does feel like the third one, who has less fleshed out personality than Scourge and Nightbird. He has this, like, attack where he can swing out these 2, like, grappling hooks that can latch on to Autobots or pieces of the train and just throw them around. And, like, when he does show up, it's like, oh shit, it's the guy with the hooky things again. So, at least you can recognize him and understand that he's a threat. We're actually introduced to Scourge before we're introduced to any of the human characters, and the prologue scene really does a good job at showing Scourge as, like, this big, menacing threat. So when you see the good guys struggle so much to fight him, it really feels believable. Scourge in this movie is a servant of Unicron, perhaps referencing the fact that Scourge in G1 was sort of kind of created by Unicron, and he really has this air of menace because he's so tough. He has a habit of ripping the insignias off of the Transformers he fights and blasting them on his own arm like trophies. If you look at his arm closely, you can actually see he's got tons of insignias from different factions, even from the Predacons, who, despite the Maximals being very prominent in this movie, are not even mentioned. But there's one of their insignias on his shoulder. Wonder who he killed. It's probably Scorponok. Stupid Scorponok. The plot of this movie is pretty simple. Basically, the MacGuffin is the transwarp key, which will allow anybody to warp anywhere. Scourge has been instructed by Unicron to get it, so that Unicron can warp wherever he wants to in the universe and basically turn all of space and time into his own snack buffet. Meanwhile, the Autobots want the transwarp key so that they can warp back to Cybertron, because apparently they've been stranded there since the last movie. The prologue does a really good job of establishing both the villain's motivation and the Maximals' motivation, because the Maximals are introduced as the faction who their main goal is just to keep the key away from Scourge. And I do like the mix-up that instead of the Autobots being the one who are trying to protect the MacGuffin and prevent the bad guys from using it, Optimus actually wants to use it for himself. And I really like that. It kind of changes up the usual formula. Normally Optimus is like the smarter who's willing to screw over his own troops just to keep the bad guys at bay, but not this time around. Even though they're told several times that the key is dangerous, if Scourge gets that, it's game over for the whole universe. Optimus still doesn't want to destroy it, even though destroying it is an option, and he wants to use it for himself. And I kind of like seeing, like, a more selfish side of Optimus. It's not just selfish for the sake of being selfish. It's selfish with an understandable motive. He wants to go home. It's been established that the war of on Cybertron has been ongoing while Optimus and the other Autobots are stuck on Earth. This provides a clear motive for Optimus to get back to Earth, because there's this whole war happening without its leader, and that is obviously very stressful. Optimus in general is pretty angry in this movie. I commented all the way back in Age of Extinction how I liked angry, jaded Optimus. Well, you could argue that the Optimus in this film is supposed to be, like, somewhat younger and less mature than Optimus in the Bay films, because the people who make this film are being frustratingly, like, non-committal about whether this is a prequel or not. That said, Optimus does have a believable reason to be angry in this, and seeing, like, an Optimus who gets mad, who gets vengeful, who doesn't want to work with humans, who is easily fed up, like, that... I actually like that. Very often Optimus is portrayed as a bit of a saint. Like, it was a running joke in Nostalgia Critic to outright compare him to Jesus.
Remember, I died for your sins.
So seeing an Optimus who's more human and flawed is, like, something that I personally enjoy. It's the reason that the Optimus from Transformers Animated was one of my favorites, because he, too, was a young and inexperienced leader, and he had a lot of personal baggage and flaws because he's never led a faction of, like, warriors before, and he doesn't really know what he's doing.
I'm not sure I know anymore. So far, every single decision I've made today turned out to be the wrong one. Maybe Bumblebee was right. Maybe I'm not cut out to lead this team.
The film acknowledges that their portrayal of Optimus isn't typical. When Optimus Primal, when they finally meet, Primal, it turns out, is younger than Optimus because he was named after him, which helps, I guess, handwave why they have such similar names, even though they're from two different planets, and Primal is not Prime's descendant in this continuity. And Primal, like, kind of disappointingly comments that Prime isn't what he imagined he would be. And I like that too. I like that Optimus doesn't live up to the shining ideal that was established in G1 and Prime and all those other shows where Optimus is basically the messiah of the robots. The plot is functional in that it's simple and, like, you can follow it easily, which is a vast improvement over the Michael Bay films where you just have, everything is so contrived, it's so busy and clustered, you just, like, I don't know where I am. I liked Age of Extinction, but even in my review of that film, way back when it came out, I acknowledged that, like, a lot of these scenes don't really connect together. It's just like, here's a cool scene of them fighting Megatron, here's a cool scene of them fighting Lockdown, here's a cool scene of something else, and it doesn't, like, connect together. This film at least has a functional plot, and it's a sign of how sad the state of Transformers movies sometimes get, where having a functional plot is seen as a highlight. There are some plot weirdnesses, and some things that don't quite make sense, and that's putting aside the continuity issues with the other movies. There are times where I think, like, well, why couldn't they do that? Why wouldn't that work? What? For example, Noah establishes early on that he wants to destroy the Transwarp Key so that Unicron can't come to Earth and munch it. Totally understandable. I was actually kind of rooting for Noah to destroy it, because yes, please, destroy it so that Unicron can get it. But then that raises the very uncomfortable question, why don't the Maximals destroy it? It's been established that they've been guarding it for thousands of years before the plot started. Did not occur to Optimus Primal to smash Key with rock? You're a gorilla, you're supposed to be good at that. If there was a reason given for why the Maximals didn't want to destroy it, I never heard it. It was just very unclear. There's a few deaths among the good guys, but only one of them stick, and I won't tell you which one because I'm trying to avoid spoilers. There's a scene early on where the character looks like they're dead, but I'm like, there's no way that character's dead. Like, not like that, not so abruptly. And while I don't think killing off that character so unceremoniously would have been the right choice, it is frustrating that the movie is kind of so wishy-washy about death. While it was frustrating that characters would be killed off so abruptly in Transformers Prime, it did give some stakes to the action and to the plot. Like, once a character's dead, you're not going to see them again. That's not true in this film. A lot of times they come back through just, like, contrived plot nonsense, or sometimes with no explanation whatsoever. There are also a few moments where, like, the way that the climax works, it isn't completely clear what's going to happen. There are certain actions that they say will have, like, a catastrophic result, but when they actually do it, it, like, doesn't. It's like, oh, this is a more underwhelming kind of implosion than I was expecting. The climax also feels overly long and bloated. I feel like, kind of, they got a mandate from some point at Hasbro, like, we need this scene to be this long so we can show off all these characters, so we can sell their toys. So the climax is too long. The climax of previous Transformers films have also been too long, but at least this climax is coherent. I can follow the action. It's very clear what they're trying to do. They do have a scene right before the climax, like, okay, this is the plan. We're gonna go here, and we're gonna do this, and we have to complete this before the deadline. Like, they establish a clear deadline, so, like, we know what the action in the climax is gonna be. So, like, it's been a while since I've watched any of the Michael Bay films, but I remember it just being just a cluster, and like your eyes just kind of glaze over because it's so busy. These films don't have that problem. All the action scenes are pretty well done, and you can follow them. I can see what's happening. The film is also good at giving the human characters things to do. There are a lot of cases where the humans need to get into spaces that the Autobots can't get into because they're so big. Elena, especially, with her knowledge of ancient civilizations such, as really useful for like finding MacGuffins and like getting to locations and stuff, and she plays a pivotal role in the climax. The film has to like kind of stretch more to like try to explain why Noah would go along, specifically why Optimus would allow Noah to go along, because Optimus doesn't like Noah. Optimus just has a thing against humans in this film, which I know they haven't happened yet, but considering the track record in the Bay films, again, is understandable. But they find ways for Noah to be helpful in the climax, too. He's not just watching from the sidelines. Even though this film isn't as bloated down with characters as previous films have been, there is clearly, like, a character imbalance with the Autobots. Like I said, Mirage and Optimus get the most focus. Bumblebee is almost an afterthought. RC looks really cool and she fights well and stuff, but we don't really get a glimpse of her personality other than hero. That's all. The same issue also extends to the Maximals. The first Maximal we meet is Airazor, and she's also the most fleshed out. We also learn a lot about Optimus Primal, and of course, because he's voiced by Ron Perlman, he has like a really, great presence, and, you really buy the gravitas of this character. Primal is more like Optimus Prime, the typical Optimus Prime than Optimus Prime is. Cheetor and Rhinox, though, kind of get the back seat, and it's understandable with a cast this big that some characters, like, they have to be in the back so that we can focus more and flesh out, other characters. When you try to shove in too many characters having character-shilling moments, it, like, needlessly extends the film and it gets too bloated. But it is a shame when you think about, like, how, we think about Cheetor and Rhinox and, like, how memorable they were in Beast Wars, and we don't really get to see a lot of that, but that's okay. All in all, I think I have to say that I enjoyed this movie more than Bumblebee, and I know this movie has a lower score on Rotten Tomatoes than Bumblebee did, but Bumblebee felt less like a Transformers movie and more like a girl meets monster movie. In this case, the monster being a giant transforming robot. Bumblebee was slower paced and almost felt like an Iron Giant clone. And while that type of film is more likely to please critics, it isn't really what Transformers fans are looking for. One comment that I did see from a critic of Rotten Tomatoes that I think is very telling says, "If I were 9 years old, I think I'd like this movie." And that's really what the movie's strength is. This movie is a lot more accessible to children than the Bay films were, but it should be engaging to Transformers fans as well. And of course, if you're looking for just a summer blockbuster with lots of action, CGI, this gives that too. The Bay films were like, I guess you could show a 10-year-old those movies, but if you do, you have to be ready to answer like some very uncomfortable questions. Like, why is there so much underwear in this movie? Why is Bumblebee peeing on that man? The Bay films almost feel douchey and honestly kind of sleazy in how much like mature content there was in terms of like swearing and vulgar stuff. This film doesn't have that, and it weirdly feels more mature for it because it's catered to be more accessible to all ages and isn't just like trying to like impress us with that edge. Not that this film isn't accessible to adults. There is some pretty grisly violence. A character dies early on in the prologue scene, and the way it's done feels very gory even though it's a robot. So there's no organs and no blood, but at the same time it's like, ooh. The issues faced by the human characters as well as the moral dilemma over the key also come across as very mature issues. This isn't something that's like childish, that's going to bore adults. I think it is accessible to adults, but if you don't want to see a Transformers film, this movie isn't going to change your mind. One last thing I do want to say, and this goes into spoiler territory, this is the one like clear-cut spoiler I'm going to say. There is sort of a post-credit scene, not really, it actually happens before the credits, but it does tease a future movie, and weirdly, it's not the next Transformers movie. This movie probably will have a sequel, and the ending does leave it open for a sequel. But at the end of this film, Noah is approached by someone who like knows about his exploits in the movie and knows that he helped save the world. No spoilers, you know he's gonna save the world. You know this movie isn't gonna end with Unicron eating everyone. At first, you're expecting this guy to be with Sector 7 or with Nest or something. No, this guy is with G.I. Joe. The end of this movie teases a G.I. Joe film. And I did not see that coming. And it looks like they might be aiming for a Hasbro Cinematic Universe. This is where we are, folks. Now, this might seem like it's out of nowhere, but it's really not. You might not realize this, but the original G1 Transformers cartoon is actually in the same, like, shares the universe with the original G.I. Joe cartoon. It's not alluded to very often. Like, I don't remember there being any, like, big crossover episode between the two shows, as awesome as that would have been. But, like, occasionally a character from G.I. Joe will show up in Transformers. There's one recurring character in Season 3 of Transformers called Marissa Fairborn, who I think the creators confirmed is Lady J's daughter. And, Cobra Commander also cameos in one episode of Season 3. They don't say that it's him, but it's clearly him.
Poor Mr. Draft. Not quite smart enough, were you? They simply don't make terrorists like they used to.
And, of course, like, the two series shared voice actors, so obviously they didn't voice the same characters. Like, Chris Latta was both Starscream and Cobra Commander, and I don't think they're the same person. Or are they? But yeah, if Hasbro builds up to a cinematic universe, that... I don't know how that'll work, but at least they're building up to it slowly, and they're not, like, throwing, like, whatever the Hasbro equivalent of a Justice League movie is at us, with, like, Optimus Prime fighting the Misfits alongside Pinkie Pie. Would that be stupid or awesome? I don't know. I don't know what the G.I. Joe movie is going to be like when it does come out. I don't know if it's in the works already. I know nothing about it. And not every Hasbro property clearly meshes in the same universe. Like, I could see them making a Gem movie that is actually a Gem movie, unlike the last one, and maybe seeing if that could fit into the same continuity. But, like, are they gonna get My Little Pony in there? Littlest Pet Shop? Is that a Hasbro product? I don't remember. Ouija board? Is there gonna be a Ouija board movie that doesn't suck? Like, I don't know where they're gonna go with this, but I am willing to find out. So that's my review of Transformers Rise of the Beasts. It's shorter than my other reviews. I'm trying to, like, have film rants that are not as long as previous ones have been. This movie is simpler in a lot of ways, and it's less bloated with things to say than, say, The Little Mermaid was. I feel like the reason this movie made me less angry than The Little Mermaid, even though Little Mermaid, a remake, was, like, not a bad film, but I feel like this film was less frustrating to watch because it's an original story, albeit told with, like, licensed characters that we've seen before. Whereas Little Mermaid was a remake, so every little change they made, like, frustrated me because I could see the film becoming weaker because of these changes. This film, because it's an original story, didn't have that baggage, so it was easier for me to watch. So I guess from this review, you should be able to tell if this is something you'd be interested in seeing. If you're a Transformers fan, you've probably seen it already. But the summation at the end of the day is, it's decent, and it's definitely an improvement from what we've seen before in this franchise. Not a high bar to cross, but it does cross it, and hopefully the films will continue to get better. I'm actually curious to see what Megatron and the other Decepticons have been doing on Cybertron all this time without Optimus. I imagine they feel very lonely. Hopefully we'll see that in a future film, and hopefully they'll just finally commit to making this a straight-up reboot, because I don't know why you would want to keep the Bay movies in continuity. They suck! Anyway, that's my review. Tell me what you thought of the movies down in the comments below. I'll see you next time. This is DragonKeeper 9600, signing off.